on, this is of course an initiative on civil rights as we foster active public engagement, not forgetting most of all, trying to hear all the nation's stakeholders' voices as we do get ready for the 2021 general election. I'm Arnold Sagawa, your host today, and I'm joined to my left. I do have Dr. Livingstone Sewanyana, who is the Executive Director, Foundation for Human Rights Initiative. Among other things, he does wear very many hats, I'm told. Right next to him, in the middle, we do have Miss Ruth Sechindi, who is the Director, Monitoring and Inspection at the Uganda Human Rights Commission. And to my extreme left, we do have the acting spokesperson for the Uganda, the Independent Electoral Commission, that's Mr. Paul Bukenya. Lady and the gentleman, many thanks for making time to speak to us.
Thank you.
Of course, in the due course, we will be joined by a representative from the Uganda Police. But let me start with you, Dr. Sewanyana. This particular campaign, the My Rights, My Power campaign, how would you sum it up in a few words for someone who is hearing about it for the first time?
Thank you, Arnold. In a few months, we shall be going to the polls, precisely in 2021. And during an election season, there are many players. There are those institutions charged with delivering on the elections, mainly the Electoral Commission, the Uganda Human Rights Commission, the Uganda Police Force, and other players. But on the other side of the coin, you have the candidates, their agents, their supporters, and of course you also have the general public who constitute the electorate. Now, within this framework, there are certainly issues that arise. One of them being the environment in which the election is held, and questions come up. The public is expected to be knowledgeable about the entire process, while those charged with delivering on the election are supposed to keep them informed, but also to prepare them adequately. My Rights, My Power campaign is basically to ensure that we create a nexus between the two, ensuring that we troubleshoot. We need to pick issues from the public on one hand and make them known to the powers that be, and the powers on the other hand should be able to respond to the issues that arise from the public. And in the process, create an environment that is conducive for a fair and inclusive election. That's the essence of My Rights, My Power campaign.
It's quite fascinating. Maybe Mr. Bukenya and Director Sechindi, you could just also jump in right around the same. There are many stakeholders here. There are many pieces of the puzzle, and obviously, arguably, the one who is spending the most sleepless nights has to be you, Paul. How do you fit into this particular one? Maybe you could start, then Ms. Sechindi just comes in after.
Yeah. Good afternoon once again, our viewers. We, as the Electoral Commission, by law, established to facilitate exercise of rights. That's we are established by the Constitution to organize and conduct elections. So our work is to ensure that we work out that processes which people can go through to exercise their rights and elect their leaders. So at the center of our work is that critical, those critical rights and those key fundamental rights to freely choose representatives. And I think for that reason we are placed under that section, representation of the people, if you look in the Constitution, where it is structured. So our work is cut out in the Constitution and all the enabling acts, Presidential Elections Act, Electoral Commission Act itself, Parliamentary, Local Government, and other Political Parties and Organizations Act, to be at the center of ensuring that the citizens of Uganda exercise their rights regularly through periodic elections as stated in the laws. We are definitely interested and part of the wider effort to ensure that Ugandans know about their rights and exercise them and participate in elections in a lawful manner, peacefully, regularly, and everything that goes along with that. So this campaign then fits into what we are called to do and puts us together with other partners to achieve that critical constitutional right of choosing leaders.
Definitely. Director Ruth, let me bring you in. Maybe you could just touch that. But after that, maybe also just unpack for me, as someone who's in charge of monitoring at the Uganda Human Rights Commission, I get the sense that, well, in our past interactions, something has been very clear, that any malpractice is, in regards to elections, is not an event. It's more of a process. Just talk to me about that, what this actually means for the Uganda Human Rights Commission in campaigns like of this manner, vis-a-vis this actually being a process, and how the Uganda Human Rights Commission would actually be watching these particular processes leading up to the poll day come February 2021.
Okay, thank you very much. Good evening, viewers. Man is a political animal. And because we're a political animal, we always need leaders, we always need guidance, we need laws, regulations. And to do that, the Constitution, Article 1 says, power belongs to the people. And it goes on when it brings up fundamental rights on how to choose a leader and how to determine on how we're going to be led. Then issues come in where we're supposed, the Constitution provides for electing leaders every 5 years. That makes 2021, or the process running towards 2021, very important and critical. Why? Because elections are not an event, like you've said, it's a process. And determining our leaders impacts on every other right that we have as citizens. It determines our development in the country. It determines how we shall develop. It determines what we stand for as a country. It determines the laws that will be made in Uganda, what they will look like. So the people we vote into political offices determine what our country looks like. And that is why it's very important for us to ensure that there is fair, free elections, and it has to be regular. But then the people's voices are heard through elections because they're able to determine the persons who stand for those values that they believe in. They're able to determine issues that they believe in. Now, for us at the commission, as a commission, we start monitoring, for example, we started monitoring right from 2016, immediately after the previous election. And we look at the media, social media, how people are reacting, and the events that lead up to the runner-up to the election. And our role is multi-faced. It has monitoring, it has civic education as required by the Constitution, it has components of receiving and investigating complaints on human rights violations. But right now, this My Right, My campaign is very critical because it reminds Ugandans, we are here as partners, to remind Ugandans that it is your fundamental right to elect leaders on principle and issues, and that no one should deter you from it. We are also partnering to remind ourselves that the campaign that is going on is your campaign and that it is your power. Because we go back to Article 1 that says all power belongs to the people. And that your power, you can only exercise your power by determining who leads you and the principles they stand for that they bring to the table in the country. So that is why it's very important, not only UHRC, but the EC, civil society, and all actors in Uganda to join synergies to ensure that we have free and fair elections and very peaceful elections, because it's critical for this country.
Let me thank you for that. It just creates the playing field, because this interaction is definitely going to go on for quite a while. Let me bring you in, Doctor. One of the issues that has been raised is regarding the roadmap. we're definitely operating in unprecedented times. I'm sure this is something that has been said countless times in the media and across the several meetings that many of you engage in the course of this. How convinced are you that the roadmap as it stands right now is not at loggerheads with Article 1 that Director Ruth just highlighted to and brought so much attention to us? Because let's face it, at the end of this particular election process, it does kind of resonates with the Article 1 of this particular constitution.
I think to our viewers, I think that's a very important starting point. The roadmap that was declared or announced by the Electoral Commission. I think the roadmap in itself envisages a process through which whoever is involved in the election will play his or her part and exercise that very fundamental right, the right to vote. Now, there is a key element here that needs to be understood. If I'm going to be an active participant in this process, I need to understand the process. And that again speaks to the necessity for the different players to make this regularly known to the actors. Right now there is an ongoing nomination of candidates. Does the person in the most remote area in Karamoja understand what exactly is a nomination process? What does it entail? If I were to stand for an elective position, what would I need to do in order to comply with the process? So the roadmap becomes a very important ingredient in this whole exercise. And that is why it becomes necessary, for example, for the Electoral Commission and other players to constantly, touch base with the public, to explain how the process is developing.
My issue, Doctor, is, you see, I've hosted a poll a few times, and the Electoral Commission gets a lot of stick from different political actors. And I want to call it politicizing of some of these matters, like someone saying, the date for the presidential elections hasn't been set, yet it's very clear in our laws that this will only be set after the nomination is actually done, and these are people who you're supposed to trust. So before we even go to Karamoja, that person there in Karamoja, or Kasao, like you said earlier on, we need to also maybe appreciate what is happening here and this politicizing of some of these matters, which is just appalling, before Paul jumps in.
But elections, by their nature, given that they are political, they are sensitive. So you cannot avoid politicization. Yeah. The question is, how do you deal with the different perceptions? Information is critical. Fairness is critical. The player must be seen to be neutral. Whoever is involved must be seen to be acting in good faith for the benefit of everyone. And that is why you need to constantly keep engaging all the different actors about the process. When you are determining the dates, people need to understand where you are coming from. Yes. When you say, for example, the nomination of presidential candidates will be different from the nomination of members of parliament, people need to understand where you are coming from. If you say, okay, this is how the election will be conducted, now that we are even talking about scientific elections, people need to understand what a scientific election is.
Scientific campaign.
Or a scientific election, a scientific... Of course, it leads to the same. So the politicization is inevitable. The variation in perceptions is inevitable. The question is, how are you playing? How are you playing to those tunes to make sure that everyone feels satisfied with the way the process is emerging? And of course, the process is equally important to the outcome, because if the process is in any way flawed, the outcome could also be questionable. And that is why I think it is important that all of us constantly engage, respond to people's questions. For example, people may not know why you would need to announce the dates for the presidential election differently or separately from those of other candidates. The law needs to be understood. The thinking must be clear, and that is the reason why this particular campaign becomes critical, because it now helps whoever had his or her perceptions, had felt sometimes some sense of unfairness, to know where they are coming from. And that is why in the following series it will be important, you know, to
reaffirm,
to get the questions, the reactions from the public and respond to them.
Paul, your reaction to this, sir?
Yeah, certainly engaging with our key stakeholders is key in this matter. Like you said, we rolled out this roadmap in December 2018. First of all, of course,
no COVID.
The law, of course, there was no COVID. The law is very clear. Our election schedule is predictable, because after every 5 years, of course, in the first 30 days of the last 90 days, last 122 days of the term of office, we organize and hold elections. So, but that still requires preparing the process and showing the different stages we're going to go through and progress up to the January dates that we've talked about. So, yeah, sure, we released this program in December 2018. Throughout 2019, we did quite a lot of work with the voters, with the people, with the stakeholders, voter registration, organizing polling stations, demarcation, review meetings, evaluations, and display of the register, which came in this year, and then getting started with elections, which were interrupted, of course, by COVID-19. But as the Electoral Commission, we consider engagement with the stakeholders as key, because we want them to participate at every stage of the process and exercise their rights. It goes back to the rights. So engaging with stakeholders and giving the voter education, telling them what they're supposed to do and how to lawfully participate, and to participate in high numbers is very important to us. And I think we've seen that happening. We've had a very high participation in the nominations at local government level and also in parliamentary. The same is happening at presidential. So far, the clearances are
19
of course, 22 persons have so far submitted a list of supporters, and I think it's going to be quite high participation. So we think that there's been that level of awareness which empowers people that we can participate in this election, local government, parliamentary, before we address even other issues that could relate on how they exercise those rights. At least the first opportunity to participate in election has been grabbed. We've taken hold of it and come up to present themselves. So at the center of our roadmap is the stakeholder engagement, regular. But now, of course, COVID has changed how we do this. We can't hold the traditional engagement approaches. Even for purposes of voter education, the methods that we've been using traditionally are now risk areas to go into. So, but we're adapting.
Ruth, let me bring you back now, Director Ruth, around the issues of the education, because I think one thing that really stands out is, same as Doctor has mentioned, also Mr. Bukenya is just reaffirming the same thing. It is very, very critical to engage the electorate and, of course, different stakeholders. But I get the sense that this isn't a one-time scenario where, you know, you say, I know we were in PG last month, you know, PG is good, you know. Give me a sense of, you know, the Uganda Human Rights Commission, where you stand on this. How do you make sure this message is reaffirmed in a manner that is systematic and kind of has a going concern, to use accounting terms?
The Commission around this time deals with civic education. And the Constitution, well, the Constitution gives the Electoral Commission the mandate to conduct a voter education. And the Commission has the mandate to conduct civic education. Now, the two are different. Voter education is exactly what my colleague has said here. It's about how to vote, where to vote from, when to vote, and the whole process that persons, the electorate has to go through during the voting. Now, civic education, that is our role, is to inform people about their rights, duties, and obligations on why it is important for them to vote. So the two are interlinked and interrelated, and we have to work together. Now, quite often after every election, we evaluate ourselves and say, how are we performing as a country? How was civic education? Were people aware of how to vote, where to vote, when to vote? And I think that is where Dr. Sewanyana comes in when he says, are people aware? Is there sufficient levels of access to information? Now, the Commission has come out to write to the Electoral Commission to request for certain or particular things if we are going to have free, fair, and informed elections. We are saying if we are going to use social media as a hybrid form of election, and we're going to use the media, radio, television, how accessible is it? How affordable is it? Government should work hand in hand with the Electoral Commission to ensure that every candidate has a platform to be able to relay the information on why they should be voted. We are also saying that all citizens, wherever they are, should be able to access at least a radio, a television, since the form of campaign is going to be through the media. We're happy that government is coming up with radios, but I think this is a bit, it's getting late. If we are going to procure radios for every Ugandan, every community, we had better expedite the process. We have been saying there should be a level playing field for all opponents to be able to relay their information, to give reasons why they should be elected, and that there shouldn't be any selective application of the law. Then we have also requested that a person's disabilities should be considered. Is there sign language? Have we left out persons who have different disabilities? Can they be able to follow and participate? Because when we're talking about elections, we don't want dormant participants. Persons who are fit and to vote, who have registered and who are citizens of Uganda should be active participants during the electoral period. And so we're saying the persons with disabilities should be considered, as well as women and other marginalized communities. They should be considered. Now, as the Commission, what we have done is we are, on a daily basis, we are coming up with different campaigns, trying to take the information closer to the people, and also have the information relayed or put across in different languages so that we're able to reach as many people as possible. But we can't do this alone. We need civil society. We need Dr. Sewanyana on board. We need other players and actors, because this country has maybe over 40 million as we speak now. Now, to be able to reach every community in Uganda, we need very many partners on board to be able to relay this information. And the Electoral Commission also needs to be supported financially, and also other players have to come on board. So they have to be able to partner with key institutions so that if it's about the roadmap, can we join synergies so that we explain what the roadmap is all about and how it works? And I'm glad that we are here, we're partnering today, because that is exactly what we want. When we speak as Human Rights Commission and civil society is speaking, Dr. Sewanyana is bringing the issues on board, then Equal Opportunities should also be putting the information across. So that is why we have My Rights, My Power, or My Campaign here, because that way we're able to reach people as different stakeholders, but putting information across that is relevant for all.
It's I think it would be very unfair for us to talk about this particular campaign, My Rights, My Power campaign, and be oblivious to the real people who we are trying to reach with this particular campaign. And earlier on, Dr. Sewanyana, you did share some particular comments and grievances, should I call them, from some particular sects of people. And one of them definitely is an inquisition into this so-called level playing field. If the scientific campaigns have to be done using media platforms, yet let's face it, in the past we've had particular candidates not being given, opposition candidates not being given airtime on state-owned media. Through your interactions, has there been any progress made on this particular front? Maybe you could just speak to this.
Incidentally, when we talk about a level playing field, we also need to unpack it. What does it actually mean to have a level playing field to everyone listening or viewing this program out there? A level playing field envisages 4 key elements, and these are also important to be monitored. And those elements actually constitute what you may call a fair, free, and inclusive election. And these are the following: that the election management body in Uganda, the Electoral Commission, does it have the capacity, the will, and is it neutrally enforcing the guidelines, the laws that apply to elections? And that has to be observed, because there shouldn't be any selective application. There shouldn't be anyone who feels aggrieved by the mere fact that maybe they come very tough on me and look on the other side if it's the other party. So we need to look into that. The next element is the freedom to campaign. Are all those who have expressed interest capable of having their views heard before the electorate? And in this case, of course, given the COVID-19 pandemic, we need to see how best is that being enabled, irrespective of whether you are from the ruling power or you are from the opposition. The third element has to do with access to resources. And now this one is now very tricky during this particular election. Maybe Paul will try to help us. In the past, for example, candidates used to be aided. You know, they could be aided. If you stood for presidential as a position or any other position, there was some form of support that you would enjoy. We don't seem to see this anymore. What happened? What's the thinking behind? Because at the end of the day, the question, and I think one of the grievances coming from the public, is that it looks like it's only those who have money that can offer themselves. What happens to those who have good ideas, but they don't have the money? They're not being aided. But even those who have the money, I mean, if you cost the exercise itself, I know that some of the nomination fees have been raised. Again, people want to know how much it is, but the question is, what's the thinking behind that? On the alternative, one would think that to aid everybody, to include everybody, you would lower the fees. But on the contrary, you see that the fees have been increased. Again, we need to look at that. To what extent are those who are prospective candidates aided to have their views heard? And of course, the last one, which also concerns the media, is access to the media. Is there equitable access to the media for all? Now, there are issues here which, of course, this time around COVID-19, we are talking about social media. We are talking about radio, TV, print media, everyone. Then what's the role being played by the Uganda Communications Commission vis-a-vis access to the media? Because the media is an important forum now for those who want to access to air their concerns, to have their voices heard. So even when we talk about players, going back to Madame Sekindi's issue of who are the players in this one, we need also to bring on board in this whole discussion other players. For example, the Uganda Judicial Service Commission. The Judicial Service Commission also has a role to explain the law as it applies during this time. The Uganda Communications Commission also has a role to play in determining the extent to which their directives, their policy pronouncements, whatever they do, is aiding the candidates to access the media. Now, so talking about a level playing field, you need to assess all of those 4 elements from the standpoint of the theory, but also from the standpoint of practice. And engaging whether people feel aggrieved or not, we need to look back and ask ourselves, do we see any parties that feel that they have not been treated fairly? Of course, there have been complaints coming from the public that some of the opposition members are not being treated fairly. They are not being heard. They are not, when they come to media houses, they are not being enabled. But recall that the issues that I'm raising here, and which are critical for our election, were issues that also raised by the Supreme Court during the 2016 aftermath. So we also needed to analyze the extent to which the recommendations of the Supreme Court have been implemented. We also need to note also, Mr. Moderator, that Parliament recently also passed a number of amendments. How do they affect the electoral process now, and how is the public prepared to, to participate, bearing in mind those amendments? So it's a loaded issue.
It's really a loaded point that you've unpacked. Just those 4 points, I think that could take us for another 30 minutes, and I want us to just dwell on some of these. My grasp of the legal framework of the country is not as profound as yours, and I want to borrow from Director Sechindi's assessment of Article 1 of the Constitution. Bear in mind that we do have a roadmap for the 2021 general election that is relying on a so-called scientific campaign, relying on social media and the media framework for campaigns. We're together on that, yes? Now, if we do have an over-the-top tax that is being implemented on someone to access social media platforms in the country, wouldn't that then impede one's ability to enjoy Article 1 of the Constitution? I think, let me start with Paul, then maybe Doctor and Miss Ruth, maybe you could touch that.
Yeah, well, concerning the use of media or the mode of campaigning, actually what we've presented to the candidates, to the nation, to the electorate, is a mix of approaches, bringing in what we've done traditionally, but also encouraging, the new methods. Maybe that's where we come in with the new technologies, including social media and other web-based technologies. We've, because of COVID and the cautious approach we've taken as a country, because from the start, Uganda took a cautious approach. Other people probably said, let's not look at COVID, let's go normal. But Uganda took a cautious approach. So as the Electoral Commission, we recommended a series of measures that we think will help us to prevent the spread of COVID-19 during the electoral process. But to come back to media, we've advocated use of what we normally and traditionally use, which are largely non-contact. Because remember, we wanted to make sure there is limited, low human-to-human contact. As much as possible, promote remote engagement of the electorate. And then what we call, the non-contact that I've mentioned. This includes posters, banners, flyers. They've been used before. And then the new, technologies that we've also been using, because in the previous election there was use of technology. There was use of WhatsApp, Facebook, websites, Twitter, and other formats. But we've also encouraged in our guidelines use of the normal radio and TV that announcement in the papers. But we've also allowed for meetings which are regulated. So it's a mix of approaches, so that there is, so that it answers the issue that Doctor raised. Am I free to campaign? How am I going to campaign and reach these people who have a right to hear the views, diverse views? They have a right to hear so that they make a decision. And me, who has a right to express myself. So I think along the way, as we look at COVID and learn to adapt alongside, we've advocated for a mixture of approaches. I would look at that. Now, when it comes to the particular social media issues, we've tried to engage our audiences, our stakeholders, and say, let's not be on the extreme. There are other approaches that can be used. If you can use social media, yes, definitely. And we know that now it is in vogue, yeah, you know. It's the current thing, trending and all that, yeah. There's a large part of the population that is into that. And as a government institution, we've also embraced that as a platform to use. But there are engagements with UCC, for example, that we've done along as we developed guidelines that please, can we look at an enabling environment? And as a regulator, I hope that steps will be taken. And I know some steps have already been taken. For example, UCC has issued the temporary permission to use open air broadcasting, which is the Bizindalo. You know, with respect to, because it still remains broadcasting, but they've allowed temporary use, and we are trying to ensure that it is used responsibly for purposes of elections. I think about OTT, I don't know how it has been addressed particularly, but it's a tax which is in place. There's been a discussion around it. But we think as the Electoral Commission that in those who are not able, or we find that OTT is standing in the way, then we do have these opportunities. And that's why the mix of approaches becomes a welcome. Small meetings which are organized especially by smaller, you know, groups and candidates at lower level, they all normally hold small meetings. They don't organize mass public rallies. They do one-on-one. We've allowed Kakuyege with the social distancing, with the mask. If we come here and we have a conversation one-on-one, it's allowed. Of course, there's been a question, how many will I reach within the period of a campaign set? But I think that answers his concern about free to campaign, and also partially access to media. If the cost of media is so high to buy a program like this, can I use open air and talk to the people in the town between the times that are allocated to me?
Definitely, definitely. Let's touch on the issue of one of his 4 points, the issue of access to resources. I think Director Sachindi, you could come in here. So some countries, in a bid to create a level playing field, have opted for thresholds beyond which you cannot spend this much, you know, as an aspirant for, let's say, whatever position that you're vying for. The doctor has kind of alluded to an interesting point, which would be around this monetization of the electoral process, let alone the positions. And is this something that is worth even discussing, us considering maybe thresholds in a bid to create, you know, a level playing field, and then we get to hear people's manifestos as opposed to how many posters can you print? Director?
Okay. Before I go into the thresholds and access to resources, I will start where you ended. Issues of monetization of elections. This is a real challenge that we have in the country. You saw what happened in the primaries, where there was open bribery, and people were being given 10,000, 5,000, to an extent that others were even given 500 coins, or even 200.
Underwear.
Yes, underwear. And our people forget that when they accept this money, they lose the moral authority to question some of the issues, the things that our leaders do. They also fail to hold these leaders accountable because they'll have taken their share. So they have tagged a price onto themselves by saying, I am worthy of 2,000 or 500 shillings. And that is why we're saying this has to stop. Ugandans have to stop accepting this money. But many have argued that this is coming because of poverty. And because of poverty, I have no soap at home. I surely cannot miss the 200 shillings or 2,000 shillings that this person is giving out. I would want to partake into that. But whatever it is, the monetization has to stop. So EC is best placed to give the answer of why the monies that were being given to presidential candidates were stopped. Because I think it stemmed from there. Previously, there was, I don't know, I don't want to call it a stipend, but an amount of some good millions that was given to presidential candidates to facilitate their campaigns, because we know that it's very expensive to run a presidential election in this country. You are talking about so many districts, and covering them in a short time, maybe a month or 2 months' time, is like a roller coaster. So that money was very important. And like many have said, are we saying that for you to stand, it is for the rich? Right now, the way the cost of running an election is very expensive, that a poor man or someone who has no resources cannot afford to stand for an elective position.
There was a paper done by Mr. Muguzi. We actually were on together sometime, and he tried to quantify how much was spent by the incumbent in the previous election. It was north of 10 billion Uganda shillings. This was a paper that he did. And it just creates that kind of a perspective on if we're to try to quantify how much is it. 10 billion is no joke.
Absolutely.
I wouldn't, yeah.
And if you are spending, remember there's primaries and there's the general election. And if you're going to spend 10 billions for each, you have nowhere, how are you going to reward yourself? Where are you going to get this money? These are the questions that we get, because then we are promoting corruption. This person, because they are investing, they are borrowing, and that is why when they go to parliament, you see the loan sharks are after our members of parliament, because they are borrowing everywhere. They are selling their homes for elective position, and they're expecting big. And that is why someone has argued that everyone who goes for elective position should be a rich man, and that the age limit should be raised so that it's not the age of 18, and that you must have acquired a particular qualification and reached a particular level so that we have quality for our leaders. I will not go into that debate. But then this is supposed to, people are trying to come up with different ideas on how Uganda can get good leaders, where we can be able to sieve and winnow out the chaff. And so when we are looking at issues of resources, are we only looking at the rich? Are we leaving out a particular group of people where the poor and the people who cannot afford cannot stand for elective positions? When we look at the issue of media that you raised, when we are using media as a form of campaigns, many leaders, particularly those who are not really wealthy, may opt for Bizindalo. And Bizindalos are also very competitive because they are dealing with members of parliament, they are dealing with other local leaders. So you find a Chizindalo in the community making so much noise and covering, and even who controls this Chizindalo? All those are questions that we need to put into context. So the use of the media has turned out to be very expensive. Arnold, you know that hosting a show or having someone, or even an advert on television, on your television, is so expensive. So how many Ugandans can afford, I will not even say how much it is, but how many Ugandans can afford that kind of money to go to a television? And yet previously, when they go to the fields and talk to the people in a primary school or a secondary school and campaign, it's easier. So we have to, UCC together with EC have to work together to see how the cost is either subsidized or they are supported in a particular way. The other issue has been the ownership of the radios and the televisions. I think the politicians, many politicians previously were very proactive and were foresighted. We have noted that most of these televisions and radios are owned by particular politicians who are really in elective politics. So the question then is, if I have an opponent, would they allow me airtime? Because you guys have peak time, prime time, and I don't know what time.
Off-peak.
Off-peak. Yeah. So I am sure that my opponent, if I have to, I'll have to give them the
4
off-peak.
a.m. Yes,
yes, in the wee hours of the night. So how fair? And if we're talking about a level playing field around this time, Electoral Commission has to work very hand in hand and very well with key players, security, UCC, the media, civil society, UHRC, and other players to create that level playing field. But they cannot do it alone. And that's where I think sometimes a lot of issues of blame and concerns is heaped onto them. Already they are swamped, but we need to support them.
Paul, I see you taking notes. You're going to definitely address some of these issues. That was another loaded one, Director Ruth. You raise an interesting point, one of your observations, that many of the privately owned TV stations and radio stations are actually owned by political people, and this leads us to another interesting paper that was written, I think, in the 70s by McCombs, that showed that leading up to the U.S. presidential elections in the 70s, when they interviewed the electorate in a particular sample, it showed that the people thought the issues that were pertinent and pressing at the time coincided in real time directly to what was being covered in the media. So it's very clear. It came to be known as agenda setting. But let me bring you in, Doctor. She mentioned the issue of sieving out the chaff, leading us to the question around the joke of the difference between a politician and a statesman. And the politician thinks about the next election, yet the statesman thinks about the next generation. Going back to my earlier question of having thresholds, you raised those 4 points, which are big points, but for me, I believe the biggest problems in the nation emanate, at least the election process, emanate from our inability to control this monetization that has become synonymous with the electoral process. Just touch on much of what she actually, maybe react to that, then maybe touch on that point that you raised of the resources.
Yeah, talking about resources, of course there is the ideal and what is prevalent. The ideal would be that anyone who expresses a will to compete should be aided or supported, as the case was before. But then on the other hand, increasingly, there is the cost of running the process, and of course the two need to be viewed in perspective. But besides the whole question of commercialization, one goes back to the essence of leadership and why do people have to offer themselves on one hand, and why I would have to make a decision of X over Y. Yeah. Now, that I think again should be reflected on. When we talk about leadership in this country, what are we really talking about? Because it has a bearing on who offers himself and what amount or nature of investment you make. If leadership to Ugandans actually means employment now, then they are ready to risk whatever they have, you know, for the sole purpose of ensuring that they are elected. And what goes on with that, of course, are the malpractices you saw.
It's actually employment.
Ideally, leadership is supposed to be a service to humanity. You are supposed to be offering yourself to serve. But it seems like increasingly in Uganda, because of the challenges of poverty, the challenges of unemployment, leadership is another form of employment. And because it is a form of employment, then people now, you know, can risk all the little they have for that purpose. And as such, the wealthier now has the day. So whoever cannot afford can no longer offer himself or herself. Now, how do you deal with that? It could also be a policy issue. Yeah. Because ideally, do we have a policy on thresholds? Has Parliament has addressed itself to the whole question of how much should I actually invest if I'm offering myself for LC1, LC2, or mayorship, or member of parliament and what. So that means there is some work that needs to be done. And the public expects, now talking about elections, expects that those who are charged with the management of society should be thinking about that, so that it is not left to the wealthy. But then I wanted also to pick up one or two things. Mr. Bukenya raised the issue of some alternative ways of campaigning that they have approved. Yeah. And this is information that the public wants to hear. So the question is, how do you ensure that the SOPs that you actually have issued are being implemented to the letter, are followed, are understood? Because when we talk about Bizindalo, definitely that brings some degree of relief to those who want to campaign. But not all of them are aware. But then it brings in another element, Ruth. Yes, if there are going to be very many Bizindalos, the question of noise pollution also comes in. So elections are no longer a preserve of Electoral Commission, Human Rights Commission. Now I'm talking about Judicial Service Commission, Uganda Communication Commission. It also now spills over to NEMA, National Environment Management Authority. What role do they play in ensuring that, you know, there's control of noise? Because I wouldn't want to be in a place where, you know, this one is speaking about this and the other is speaking about that. Is the Electoral Commission in position, for example, to control that? So there are so many things coming in. Then the question of OTT. You talked about the issue of OTT. Now that we are talking about using social media as one of the ways through which people can pay, again, we expect that this matter can also be revisited. There was a debate recently. An official from the Ministry of Finance came out and said that they were considering a review of this matter. The World Bank, in its report on its update on Uganda, had made it very clear that there was a need to revisit this issue. But then, what's the progress? Because when we talk about elections, I think not only the Electoral Commission, the public and government should be interested in knowing how far is internet being used by the ordinary person, because you need information to go out. And one of the ways you ensure is that people can readily afford to pay OTT. If OTT is a barrier to this, then maybe it needs to be revisited. These are the grievances coming from the public, and this is the information that the public wants to hear. And once we have these platforms, let's hear from all these authorities how they are addressing that.
Many questions to be answered. Paul, I see you itching to actually respond to many of these. Many of them are actually well, you can address them. But we need to take a quick break. I'll be coming back with you, Paul, to just touch on many of these issues. If you're just joining us, you're part of our campaign. That's My Rights, My Power campaign, as we do seek to indulge and engage many of the stakeholders in this particular electoral process as we do gear up for the 2021 general election. Let's take a quick break. I'll be back after this. Welcome back. You're still watching our particular panel discussion on My Rights, My Power campaign, as we do try to engage all the stakeholders as we gear up for the 2021 general election. If you're just joining us, I'm Arnold Sagawa. To my left, we do have Dr. Livingstone Sewanyana, who is with the Foundation for the Human Rights Initiative, and to his left, we do have Miss Ruth Sechindi, who is with the Uganda Human Rights Commission. Before we took a break, Ruth, you just wanted to touch some particular issues vis-a-vis OTT, of course the Bizindalo as they've come to be known. Could you just maybe elucidate on that?
Yes, I will start with control of monetization of election or voter bribery. And even though different actors, including the HRC, we came out to propose that we need stringent measures for any person found in voter bribery. For example, disqualification. Unfortunately, some of these issues, very stringent measures or proposals were thrown out because we believe as long as we still have that, we have no threshold, no limit in which how much someone should invest in a campaign, then there's likely to be voter bribery. You are seeing people, our leaders have noticed the gaps that we have, maybe provision of services like lack of boreholes, like lack of ambulances, and all of them then rush to fill that gap during a particular season. So you're seeing ambulances are a popular thing, tractors are a popular thing around this time, so you're seeing that there are a lot of road constructions, particularly in the rural areas or in our communities. We are seeing a lot of digging of boreholes just to be seen. But we need to go beyond that and help the ordinary person because these are then the reasons why people vote particular persons in office. And we have to go back to the drawing board. Why do you stand for elective position? Is it for a job? Is it for the big monies that or allowances that you see ahead, or you want to offer service? Those should be the issues, but we should have sufficient laws to control the monies in the public around this time. And then when we look at OTT, many actors, including the Human Rights Commission, have come out to say, can we suspend or relax the OTT right now? Because we know that the younger generation rely so much on social media and on the phone. That is where they receive the news. And these days, the newspaper, the print media is really getting out of
traditional.
The traditional is no longer being a pump like it was in our days. People are more comfortable with the news on their phones, and they need to pay that tax. It may seem like a small tax, but for the unemployed, the underemployed, and persons who are earning very little, that money is a lot for them per month or per week.
Let me just pause you there very, very briefly. If Article 1 of the Constitution says all power belongs to the people who shall exercise their sovereignty in accordance with this Constitution, 2 goes on, without limiting the effect of Clause 1 of the article, all authority in the state emanates from the people of Uganda. If you have to pay for OTT to access a means of campaigning, doesn't it defeat this same article?
It does not, because OTT came as another, you know, the state is supposed to collect taxes, and this was another measure through which they can reach to collect more taxes, to build roads and to do other things. But now we are seeing a necessity around this time where the campaigns, the public rallies can no longer happen. And the alternative that we are using is the media. And knowing that social media is cheap and easily accessible, if there is a limitation, we are saying, can it be relaxed? Can it be removed so that more people can be able to, or can it be revisited so that more people can be able to access OTT? However, even though we talk about freedom of expression around this time, freedom of conscience, freedom of opinion, social media has also been abused. I think it's also important for us to talk about the obligations of Ugandans, because rights go hand in hand with duties and obligations. And it's very important that Ugandans do not forget the fact that many times we have also abused the media, the social media, where we have released fake news, insulting news or information, and that derails the whole campaign, where we dwell on non-issues and we have fake news moving around, and as such, it affects our campaign, it affects our power as a country, it affects what we intend to achieve out of the election. So whatever we do, when we're using the media, there's also need for us to be responsible, or there's need for every person to be responsible in the use of this media. And quite often we forget to talk about that. Now, the other issue is the players, where we say the actors of this campaign, or the actors in the electoral process. There are many, and we've talked about police, we've talked about the Electoral Commission, Uganda Human Rights Commission, civil society, the Judicial Service Commission, but the judiciary as well. It's very important that the judiciary comes on board, because they are the ones who are going to hear the petitions, the election petitions. Right now, we're in a situation where particular petitions that were filed in 2016 have never been concluded. And some MPs' term has ended before their cases have been concluded. And I'm asking myself, so this judge will sit in 2022-23 to decide a case of 2021, and the person, you know, served his term, and what's the relevance? So it defeats the purpose. And we say justice delayed is justice denied. For those persons who run to, beg your pardon, who run to courts of law to petition for justice, and it is defeated because of the processes. So the judiciary should come on board and devise mechanisms of dealing with these petitions within the time frame that is provided for under the law, because we have realized that many have lost out, many claimants have lost out on this. And I like the idea of the Bizindalo and the noise pollution. Dr. Sewanyana, thank you so much for raising that. Even though it was a welcome venture, if we are looking at the many actors that are within the elections, we have local government, LC3, LC5, LC what? And then we have so many councillors, and then we are having the MPs, we are having the presidential. You are talking about many people opting for Bizindalo because it's cheaper. But how many, what amount of noise are we going to have? So I think that is where NEMA should come, and we need regulations and policies to guide on the use of these Bizindalos. It's a welcome venture. It's easily accessible for the communities, but we need proper guidance and regulations.
Let alone what the city does look
Absolutely.
like, what our streetlights do look like on the polls after. In the aftermath of the elections. It's also quite a sight. It's very colorful. Mr. Bukenya, I've seen you taking notes. I'm sure there's a lot of things that you want to touch on. There's an issue that was raised of ambulances. Again, I think it's the destitute nature that many of us find ourselves in, especially in the rural areas where, well, people are surviving on 1 meal a day. The hospitals and clinics have no ambulances, and then through this commercialization of political offices, someone decides to give away an ambulance to a hospital or a center for, and then they put their name and they brag about that and use it as a mechanism. Just talk to us about the resources, access to resources, and maybe pick on some of the other issues that the dear panelists here have also sent your way.
Yeah, resources are certainly key in a political campaign. You need to mobilize money that will help you run a campaign, a successful campaign, because of the various logistics that are required to, present yourself to the people. And like Doctor was asking, yes, previously at presidential level, the law provided for facilitation of nominated candidates, and the Electoral Commission would give some funds, money, 20 million, it used to be 20 million shillings towards establishing a campaign office, a coordination office, some facilitating the nominated candidate to set up an office. And then, of course, a vehicle, a station wagon vehicle, and a pickup truck, escort, a convoy, a lead vehicle.
But doesn't it also cost 20 million for you to be nominated?
Certainly,
as a president?
there's a nomination fee. There's a nomination fee is a requirement.
So the same nomination fee, which is 20 million.
That time it was less. It was 8 million shillings.
Oh, okay.
But still, a nomination fee is a requirement.
Right.
You would still to be nominated. You require to pay a certain amount of money.
Okay.
But the law was amended, and it removed some of the facilitation that used to be extended to nominated candidates for presidential. Now, the only provision that we have for them is a security and a lead vehicle for that, a pickup truck, with security, and then, of course, security at home, personal bodyguards and all that. Yeah, but our laws provide for responsible use of resources, and there is an attempt throughout, if you read the legislation on campaigning and the guidelines on campaigns, use of funds, use of money to influence decisions of voters is described. It falls under the categories of election offenses. In other words, voter bribery is an election offense. And we've also seen some cases coming up in courts of law where an elected candidate is accused of having, involved themselves in voter bribery. And we've seen some elections nullified on that ground. So it is serious, it's taken serious, so it is part of the voter education that we do and the engagement with the nominated candidates. We bring it to their attention that this kind of conduct is an offense. It can endanger your candidature, or even when you're elected, you're still not out of, you can still be brought to account and lose your position in parliament. I think that's how far the Electoral Commission goes. Then it becomes a responsibility again, and it comes back to the people. How do they deal with candidates? Candidates who present themselves with ideas, and then there are candidates who present themselves and use money to buy, to win favor and to win the support of the electorate. It comes back to, how the two engage. If a candidate appeals to you because they've given you money, then it tells a lot about awareness of your rights, and also tells a lot about the aspiring candidate or the candidate themselves, how much they value you, and things like that. So it's a concern to the Electoral Commission. It's a subject in our engagement with candidates. It's also something that is use of money, and particularly voter bribery. It is under the category of electoral offences.
How is the Electoral Commission addressing the issue that Director Sachindi has brought up, which is some petitions that were filed in, 2016, and 3 months away from the next general election? Some of these are still pending. Is there even a need to have some of these petitions still collecting dust? Are you engaging with the Judicial Services Commission?
Well, the judiciary, or rather the electoral laws were actually amended to provide for hearing and determining election petitions within a period, so that they do not exceed. And I think it's 6 months within which they need to be heard. But I think the law, and I'm not an expert there, but sometimes, a person, a petitioner puts in other applications and goes around that, and the appeals and other issues that come up and probably make the process longer. But now it is I think it is much shorter than it used to be. There's a time when actually we had very quite long, lengthy processes, which would frustrate petitioners. I think that one, there is effort to bring it under control and to make sure that the election petitions are now heard and determined expeditiously. They are given priority. When you look at how, now that we have an electoral agenda, the judiciary, for example, is looking at setting the first 6 months after these elections, especially the period from February through to probably that would be into August, to hear and determine election-related petitions. But I think the other processes that come along the way, I may not be so good at describing them, make the process a little bit longer. But it's, of course, a concern because we are sometimes respondents, and it also impacts on us. And sometimes we can't move in the directions we want because we are still in courts of law. We can't make certain decisions because the matter is before a judge or a magistrate, or now let's say a judge. So I think some effort has been made in that direction to ensure that the right of the petitioner to be heard and to be heard within a reasonable time is guaranteed.
Dr. Sawanyana, let's move on to some of the other concerns that have come forward. I'm going to put these two together. One is the security issue. The other is violence. Now, we are beginning to understand that a particular beret is not okay, and the media has also been warned for hosting candidates and political office aspirants wearing this particular attire. Give me a sense of, in your view, the Foundation for the Human Rights Initiative, how are you unpacking this particular situation? How are you finding it as we have this particular campaign, being cognizant of the fact that there are many players here that we actually do have to respect?
Yeah, I think you raised a very fundamental issue, the issue of security during elections. There is an underlying thinking that during the electoral process, the Electoral Commission is actually in charge and seeks in providing security support from law enforcement agencies. Now, of course, the question is to what extent and how much power do they have in regulating the conduct of those law enforcement agencies. That has always remained on our as a matter of debate for a long time, and I think the earlier it is resolved, the better, because it impacts also on the electoral process, because there are very many players who often feel aggrieved by the nature of treatment that they receive from law enforcement agencies. Again, we have seen on many occasions not only remove the question of red ballots, which we are raising, but there have been also issues to do with opposition members going to media houses and being blocked, or and of course those journalists being, penalized for hosting those sort of politicians. And the question is, how does the Electoral Management Body respond to such an issue? So the question of security and treatment of candidates in particular and their supporters becomes critical. Now, red ballots, by their very nature, that it has been argued, are a monopoly of the law enforcement agencies. But one can also argue that what I wear is actually a matter of how I express myself. So
now you're
there is a very thin line between the two. While security can argue that it is a preserve, those apparels, whether a preserve of the security apparatus, one can also argue as a citizen, I have the freedom to express myself, to wear whatever attire, to put on whatever attire, so that I can express them. That is a matter now, that can be a matter of constitutional interpretation. I have heard the two voices, and I'm not the best arbiter in that regard. But what I would only emphasize here is that let's deal with the major issues, because I find sometimes undue, unnecessary attention being, put on things like red ballots, when actually there are bigger issues, issues of access, issues of fair play, issues of cost, which I think are very important to the public. So the public is really concerned. How does the Electoral Commission respond to this question of, people, recently there were traders who were harassed, whose merchandise was actually seized. There is a cost element to that. So how do you respond to that? By the way, Machas is a trader, he's also a citizen, he's a voter. He also feels, that he has been mistreated in this process. Again, he expects some response, not from only the security agencies who will say, this is a monopoly, this is a monopoly of the security agents. The question is, I'm expressing myself and I'm being mistreated. I'm losing my merchandise. And in a situation that we are in right now, this COVID pandemic, where people are so poor, you deprive this person of a source of earning.
Yeah.
How do we respond? So I'm saying it's a critical issue, but it touches on many players. It's a rights issue. It's also an economic issue, but it's also an issue of equity. You see, it's an issue of equity. If, for example, you wear yellow, Arnold, and I wear red, why should I be victimized because I wear red and you who wears yellow is not victimized? The public out there is asking questions, and these are the issues. So in terms of responding, one needs an arbiter, but that can be a matter for interpretation by so many players. Of course, could be an issue also for the Human Rights Commission, not necessarily the Electoral Commission.
Definitely, I don't even need to be here. You three can you can go
so
on.
I don't know how you
talk about this.
How you have addressed that, because for me, I feel there is some degree of unfairness on how the institutions, state institutions, actually respond in situations like this. Maybe it is true, it is a preserve of the security agents, but then the question would be, maybe the timing is wrong, because when you conduct the operation during that time, then maybe people feel that, why are you doing this? Why didn't you do it earlier? Because the contestation has been always there. But how comes you are doing it now when nominations are just around the corner, when all this is going on? Why not earlier? Why today? Maybe now that brings me another important player. The UPDF has to be here as well in this campaign, because they should also explain why they do things the way they do them, and what makes them think this is my preserve, and therefore people who behave differently should be treated differently.
Please, the two of you, if you could just touch on some of these issues. Let me start with you, Mr. Chingi.
You raise issues that have been in the media, in the public domain, and you're right, the public has raised many of these issues of the Red Beret. If you remember last year, and also when, well, it was in the law about the Red, but when they gazetted the Red Beret, the discussion was on. And we knew that this has been, it's within the law. Now, the question then is if particular persons, okay, if continued to use the beret, why didn't we stop it at the time? So that is where the public, I think, came out to question the timing is making it suspicious. But like I said, it will have to be a court of law to decide this. Because it is, one, it is within the law, and the argument has been, no, the law provides for the mark, the UPDF mark, and not the color. And then they said, no, it is the color and anything that is similar to anything of security. But I think for me and for us, it is about selective application of the law. If we are going to apply the law, then it has to be on all fronts.
Not selective.
Not selective. So that if the NUP is using the red beret, there's Butcherman and his team who are wearing military uniform, okay. And there's also the yellow.
There's a yellow
then let it be, let it apply on all fronts and not to a particular group. I think that is when persons will feel equitable. But then, even before we come to that, it's important when we're dealing with human rights and security, particularly police, because police is the law enforcer, that we ensure that we do a lot of dialogue, community dialogue. We have community policing. Before we get to particular operations, it's important that there is more dialogue and interactions with particular communities, with particular persons or particular groups before we get to a particular, before things get out of hand. Because we have seen that it works. And the way you handle issues and the way you intervene in particular issues determines the outcome and the perception that you may have. So for us, we believe that it's important for dialogue. It is important for community policing. It's important for people to understand each other. It's important for for sharing information. Now, the questions are coming out now, but this law has been enforced. I think it's important, it would have been important to explain further to persons about the red beret and what it means. We are seeing many posters of people standing on the red and the NUP ticket with the red beret. What does that mean? Does it mean that all of them are committing an offense? Because it's an offense to wear an attire that is similar to that of the UPDF. So it's important that as persons in authority, in security, we come out to explain what it means and what we do not want others to use. That way, people make, when anyone makes a mistake or arrogantly decides to use a particular mark, then it will be based on informed or decision, or but not misinformation or lack of information. So for me, I think from the human rights perspective, there's need for more dialogue, there's need for more interaction, there's need for people to understand the law and what it means, and also the interpretation. But right now, I think we need a court interpretation on what this entails, exactly how this relates to the freedom of expression, and what was interpreted, the interpretation of that clause within the UPDF Act.
Paul, definitely the issue of communication is something that's recurring, and it's coming back and forth. Please touch on many of these issues. And also there was a few weeks ago, I think, there was an issue around a particular party's colors that resembled the UPC's colors. and that also created some upheaval here and there, the red color to be precise. Just touch on some of these issues.
Well, thank you. Perhaps, yeah, our engagement on colors, if I could start with that, and then eventually the beret. It started as we prepared for nominations for way back, of course, at as the party applied for, use of certain colors to change their party colors. And we referred to Section 8 of the Political Parties and Organization Act, which, guides on identifying symbols, identifying colors, and a whole range of issues related to identifying a party or a candidate for that matter. And we guided on that, and actually NUP followed the guidance that we gave. So it settled the matter concerning a dominant color that we wish to use, and the process started again over the colors. But also, the beret came out as we were preparing for nomination, because it raised issues of concerns to us as the Electoral Commission. First of all, it introduced, on the beret, it introduced a symbol and slogans that are not registered with us as a political party. And we guided that this creates a conflict within our systems. And we didn't want to frustrate the candidature of any person, because it's their right to contest for elective position. For that matter, we said, and also exercising, rather applying provisions of Section 11 of the Parliamentary Elections Act, which talks about specifications for photographs, because even specifications for photographs are laid down in the Act. And we guided that please follow such and such a procedure. So for purposes of nomination, we discouraged and did not allow the use of the beret, because we knew that it would create contradiction in how photos should be. And I think it was complied with. It was complied with, which was good, and we nominated candidates. Now, what appears on the posters could
Paul, be... just let me pause you there, because if I'm to look at the incumbent, President Museveni, his photograph does have him with a hat for this particular... What do you mean when you say it complicated? How, the guiding, let's say, norms of what...
We're talking about, Arnold, we're talking about a beret which has come out, an institution of the state. And when you read Section 8 of the Political Party and Organizations Act, it talks about symbols which you can't use, for example, or even identifying colors which you can't use. For example, the national colors remain national colors, but you can't use them in their totality, for exclusively, other than for being patriotic and all that. But that's why no party has the national colors. The national emblem, for example, the crane, or the emblem. So there are certain, it prescribes, it talks about, and then it talks about institutions of the state, and I think the army is one of them. And then the army comes out and talks about items or symbols that are reserved for its exclusive use. So you don't want us, a candidate, to clash with an institution of state. So you come in and, as an arbiter, because it talked about arbitration in between, which is what we did. And it enabled candidates to be nominated. Well, what we see on posters could be different, but we also sent out a message at the same time that as much as possible, because when you are nominated, what you present at nomination is what translates into a ballot paper. You want to send one consistent message throughout, that this is my symbol, this is my photograph, because it helps us to address another challenge that we have, and Dr. Swanya knows it very well. It would lead to invalid votes. Someone would come and see, I saw a different symbol, and on polling day, I come across something different. I came here looking for, if you would allow, I came here looking for a fist in the map of Uganda, and I don't see it on the ballot paper. So where is it? It can even lead to violence. We don't see our symbol. So we guided from the start. Let's be consistent. What do we have as Electoral Commission? What's the identifying symbol? I think let's be consistent. So maybe what we see on the posters is different, but still we sent out a message, because a poster is for purposes of voter education. What do you, as people interact with a poster, they are sending a message that this is the person I'm going to find on the ballot paper. Of course, there are some attire that could be used. For example, the Islamic wear. The hat is totally something that is different from the beret that we are discussing at the moment.
Right.
And so we guided on that matter. But again, it was to protect and avoid a situation where you conflict with the law and you lose your right. For example, those who insisted that our returning officers could not proceed to nominate them, except that local government council nominations had a longer time. You could easily fail to get nominated as a result, and it could lead to violence. So I think we're guided as provided for by the law, and I think we'd be interested to seek deeper, maybe as lawyers look deeper into this, the interpretation of Section 8 of the Political Parties and Organizations Act about identifying symbols, identifying colors, and then our powers to provide specifications for photographs that we use on the ballot paper. But I think our engagement, if I can tell you, is since you raised the issue of NUP, in all their correspondence, NUP is using their symbol, which we know, which we gazetted, the blue and white umbrella. That's the official correspondence we have. So maybe there's, at the same time, there is a wrong message that brings, but we've made our position clear that the registered symbol is this, and you still have it. You've not yet moved to any other colors. Please be consistent. And by the way, it is our responsibility to do voter education, because that is voter education. It would be wrong for us to keep quiet when we see a potential area of conflict, because this is something that could lead to potential clash and complicate the entire electoral environment for us.
Thank you for that, Paul. We're going to take a quick break, but after that, definitely I'll be coming back, and we do touch on some other issues, the polling dates, and of course the register, before we do end it all at 5 p.m. Let's take a quick break, but the campaign continues. 23 minutes to 5 p.m. If you're just joining us, you are watching the My Rights, My Power campaign. And of course, my very esteemed panel is here to unpack many of these issues. To my left, we do have Dr. Livingstone Sewanyana, who is with the Foundation for Human Rights Initiative. Right next to him, we do have Ms. Ruth Sechindi, who is with the Uganda Human Rights Commission. And to my extreme left, Mr. Paul Kenya, who is the acting spokesperson for the Independent Electoral Commission. The other issue that I wanted us to touch on is really the other thing that came out, Dr. Sewanyana, when much of this engagement was happening, just to try and understand what the people have to say about, well, their concerns in this particular electoral process. The issue around the polling dates, of course, the presidential candidates. As before we came on here, Paul, you could confirm for me, I think 19 people, presidential aspirants have been verified and confirmed by the Electoral Commission. That was the verification process. I think that was going around on social media. So, yeah.
87 picked papers to prepare for nominations.
But 19
22 have returned them.
You're right.
As at 1 p.m., 10 had been verified as having obtained support from the 98 districts of Uganda, 100 supporters each district.
Apologies, it's 10.
Yeah.
Dr. Sewanyana, so you could just touch on this for me. The 70 days to move around 146 districts. This is something else that has been brought to the core, at least as a concern for... Does that being in line with the SOPs and the current situation that we are finding ourselves in, where we're going to have a hybrid campaign? Just touch on that for me.
Yeah. Again, this is another important issue that one needs to think through carefully. According to the SOPs, if I'm right, each candidate, presidential candidate, has 70 days to ensure that traverses the entire country. How practical, how possible is that? What does that actually mean? Because do you have a jet to be able, because one, how many districts do we have? We have very many districts in Uganda. I don't know what the current count is of the districts. You're supposed to go virtually to all the districts in Uganda, and even if you are subhuman, I mean superhuman, how do you traverse the whole country, all those districts within 70 days? Because even if you spent just 1 day, even if you spent 1 day per district, within those days you will not be able to cover the entire country. Number two, there's also a cost element to that comes with it, because that means you are no longer just,
You're not just showing
having
face.
rallies, anyone who comes in. It is now about people have to be mobilized, and there's a cost attached to that. There is need for clarity in terms of how these presidential candidates or nominees would be able to traverse the entire country to achieve that. Again, these are some of the gray areas which necessitate clarity from the powers or the players that be. So again, I cannot be decisive on such a matter. It's an issue for the Electoral Commission and other players to think through what arrangements do exist to enable these people to achieve that, or are there exceptions? Are there exemptions? If not, then if one of, for example, if I'm an incumbent, the chance, of course the law does not permit that, but the practice seems to be to prevail that people use the resources at their disposal. You find if I'm a mayor, or if I am chairman LS5, or even the highest office, I have all the resources attached to my office
At the time, yes.
at the time, which I can use, and that can include choppers, can include jets, it can include all the entire machinery. But what about the other candidate who, of course, does not have the benefit of those resources? Again, this is one of those areas which needs to be discussed and of course, unpacked thoroughly.
I think the two of you could just touch on that particular one. Some of these concerns, some queries that he's raised, of course, this emanates from what the people are also saying when they reach out to, let's say, the Foundation for the Human Rights Initiative. Maybe, Ruth, you could just touch that very briefly, then we throw over to Paul.
Yeah, this is a concern that has also reached our office about the time frame. That 70 days is not sufficient for candidates to cover 146 districts. That's a lot to cover in a country within just a few days. However, I don't know whether right now, since it is low, whether there's anything that can be done. It can only be strategies that can facilitate and support candidates to reach as many people as they can, particularly in view of the fact that it's going to be a hybrid campaign. That means we have to use media, all forms of media, to reach as many persons as possible. I think that was the argument. But the other thing that I have seen in this, because it's a challenge really, but the other thing, I can't put all the blame on EC, is that members of parliament passed these laws. And they are really majority, if not all, are running for elective positions. So unless we, and now some of them are actually questioning the same laws that they passed. I think it's important. Then the question is, where were you? What were you thinking? If you feel it is not fair right now. So even though EC is going to answer, but then I think the lawmakers, those who make the laws, should have anticipated, should have been foresighted to before passing some of these laws, this becoming legislation. For me, that's my take.
Paul?
Well, yeah, presidential campaigns are very, very, I imagine, I've never been a candidate. Certainly a stressful affair. We've been looking at the campaign period through the elections going, and like in 1996, just after the promulgation of the Constitution, there had to be elections, which were held, I think on 9th of May, you know, before we could have all these other laws in place that we do have now. And then a shorter campaign period, and then the period becoming, because we had 39 districts, and then we got to 45 districts, from there to 89 districts, then 112 districts that we had in 2016, and now 146 districts and cities. So with an increase in the number of districts, you cannot now sustain the argument for a candidate to have one day in each district. Although also realistically, probably from what I recall, no candidate has been to every district, which is why the law provides for agents to represent candidates. Can your agent represent you as probably as one of the measures and the strategy to cover much ground? Because even when there was 3 months, 90 days, still it was really not possible, because candidates are also humans. They take a break. They take a break in between. There's a resting day. We do manage their campaign programs. We harmonize the campaign programs. And as far as I recall, even with 3 months, no candidate was going to one district per day. Now with smaller districts, combining a few smaller number of sub-counties and new ways of communication, including media, I think there is a means to cover for that and reach as many audiences as possible, including smaller meetings with agents, meeting supporters on the behalf of the candidate. So of course it brings in what Doctor talked about, money, that you need money to facilitate all these small meetings. And also our experience has been that big mass public rallies are even more expensive than what we look at as a media program. We did some engagements with stakeholders and to assess, as we did a stakeholder engagement on SOPs, realized that a program on radio in a rural, in a district out there in Midwest, in Rwenzori, a program costing 700,000, and then that woman, aspirant for woman MP, saying that to organize a rally in that school ground with about 4 tents and a drive and all, I need about 3 to 4 million shillings. So I think I could adopt, but I also want to see the people, want to feel the vigor of the campaign, the dance, the procession. So we are looking at challenges posed by COVID, and then the change in the law, because the law was amended, because we used to hold elections in the first 30 days of the last 90 days. And we used to have the elections in the month of February, second week of February. Now it is changed to the first 30 days. We must conduct elections in the first 30 days of the last 122 days. So elections are now conducted between January 10th and 8th February. So it also explains why the campaign period has become shorter for presidential candidates, especially because they wanted to give more time for post-election issues, including appeals in courts of law over presidential elections. So there are some factors that have come in, and candidates need now to adapt to that. Otherwise, I think there is still opportunity to engage the electorate, especially now in view of COVID, using non-contact means, the remote engagement, and the low minimum human-to-human contact that we proposed in our SOPs, which I briefly went through: posters, media, and smaller meetings, regulated meetings.
I think definitely the media again comes to the fore. There's been calls for maybe the regulatory body at this particular time leading up to the election to oversee something of the sort of a presidential debate or debates of that kind, so that if you're not going to listen to what people have to offer through the traditional, you have like mass rallies, at least can we quiz them, organized free and fairly, let's say by the Electoral Commission, and then maybe in a series of 2, you get to hear what these people have to say. Is it content? Is there any strength to what these people have to offer? At least before they could go to a mass rally and they say something, now they can't. But how then do people get to hear what these people bring to the table? Are we going to have comedians, as we've had before? No disrespect to comedians, but this is ruling a nation of 44, 45 million. Surely there has to be more. Maybe we could just touch on that particular issue, the 3 of us, before we get our final remarks. Let me start with you, Ruth.
I think you raised a very pertinent question, an issue. Actually, it's an issue. If we are going to reach as many people as we can, if we are limited with time or by time, it's important that we have platforms and forums within which persons can listen to the real issues and can vote issues and not petty issues, whatever they sometimes vote for. And we anticipate that there will be a presidential debate like previously. If we can make it 2, even 3 would be better. But I know that when the time is very close, it's usually tight and it's very costly. But then members of parliament and local government and all those who are standing need platforms where they can relay the information so that people listen to the issues that they are, and good reasons on why they have to be voted into office. I think Uganda needs to move away from monetization of elections, where we vote for people because of what they give us or them, and vote for persons based on principle and based on issues. We have to emphasize this, and this is part of civic education. For us, we think that for our country to develop, we have to vote for people who take the country forward. But we can't do that when we don't know what our leaders stand for, when we don't know the values that our leaders stand for. So it's very important that they have different platforms, that the voters have access to these leaders and listen to these leaders, and that there's a level playing field, that they are able to reach the people in different forums, whether Bizindalos, whether radio, television, or different media platforms. It's very, very important that every Ugandan who's of voting age is able to access the persons that are going to vote and listen to what they are going to do for them and how they are going to take them forward. Because the truth of the matter is, election is about development for you and I. Yeah. Election is about taking our country to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2030 or 2040, whatever it is. Elections are about the good roads, the good medicines and doctors in our hospitals. Elections are about children's education. It's about the money in your pocket, issues of employment, issues of your security and safety, issues of the safety of our country. Elections are about the growth of our country. So we cannot take it lightly. It's not a cheap affair. We have to invest in it. We have to take caution to guard it jealously, because it's important for all of us.
You forgot middle income status. Very briefly, please touch on this issue. The last presidential debate was such an eye-opener, because when these guys, all of them stood there, it was very clear that some people are selling posters. Others are really there for the real deal.
That's true.
It was very clear. Please touch on that particular issue of the debate issue, the Paul and Doctor. Then after that, we'll get some final remarks from both of you. Let me start with you, Doctor.
Yeah, of course, like Ruth has said, elections are a serious matter. You are dealing with issues of national transformation. And a country like Uganda, which is now bedeviled, I would say bedeviled, with so many problems, poverty, unemployment, and all related challenges, we need leadership, quality leadership. We need people who understand what the game plan is, how you can transform a country, how you can ensure that people's livelihoods are improved. And that means the person you choose must be someone you actually appreciate. He has spoken to you, you know who he is or she is, and you understand what he or she stands for. Apparently, if you are not afforded a platform whereby you can hear and assess, it becomes difficult to make it. By the way, sometimes even just looking at a person is good enough, because you can tell and decipher between a liar, a pretender, someone who is a serial, a serial liar, and someone who is coming in for just his or her own, And sometimes, by the way, our looks are important. How you look like, how you present yourself, how you prepare yourself is also important, because the office you stand for has a purpose. And it means that the brain and the body and they need to be in tandem. And if it is that presentation that becomes very critical for me to make a decision between A, B, and C. So presidential debates can be helpful, but I think they should not be seen as the only major platform, because the time is too short, the cost is a lot, but at the end of the day, even the candidates are so many. For example, you are talking about 18 candidates for president.
22.
So
Now
far,
you-
22 have returned their forms, 10 are verified already.
Yeah,
And they're
so
still
you can
counting.
imagine a presidential debate where you have 18 or so candidates
22.
presenting themselves. How much time are they able to articulate what they stand for? So maybe there should be even mini platforms at district level or at regional level where they offer themselves, and this has to go on. Anyway, generally speaking, I think there are a lot of challenges, and the public out there is really wondering whether they are well positioned to make an informed choice.
Definitely. We're really running out of time. Paul, you'll respond to that and your final remarks. You mentioned something and I remembered this MP who said, vote me in this term, I eat, then you eat in the next term. I was appalled. Paul, you have the tough job. Please, response to this and, of course, your final remarks.
Yeah, we are conducting this election in a very complicated environment, like you noted, and so many words have been used to describe, you know, the complexities around us. But we also recognize the rights of Ugandans as enshrined in the Constitution to elect their leaders. So we looked at that and looked for a way that could deliver on both, keep them safe and enable them to participate and exercise their rights, which is what we are discussing here. So I think we will continue and pursue engagement on the SOPs which we designed and designed because they were designed to promote exercise of rights, but of course in a safe manner, because we also want a healthy population. And our engagement will continue to focus on that. That we achieve, we promote participation because we want people to participate, and also to achieve high turnout, like we've already seen. And I think it's already seen. There's been high participation in the nominations, which we want to keep engaging and see that even on polling day, people do not fear to turn up because of COVID-19. So we look at the biggest threat to exercise of rights as COVID-19, so we need to work around that, even as we address other issues that have been brought up in this discussion.
Thank you for that, Paul. Lady and the gentleman, I think we just have under a minute. We could just get your final remarks. Let me start with you, Ruth, and Doctor, you'll sum it up.
For me, I'll just say one word, that you have a right to vote and determine your leaders, and your vote is your power. So it is your right and your duty to determine what Uganda you want to see in the next 5 years. And please vote principle, vote issues, don't vote looks, don't vote money. Vote for real issues that will take Uganda forward and develop Uganda. Thank you.
Doctor?
Just to thank my fellow panelists, and also to thank the Uganda Human Rights Commission, the Electoral Commission, the Uganda Police Force, and other players, and to invite other institutions that, again, we have spoken of here, that I think they need also to be part and parcel of this process. And we think that as an ongoing process, we should be able to respond to the concerns of the public, and in that way, we prepare them for 2021.
Thank you for that, Doctor. Allow me to thank our panelists today. To my left, Dr. Livingston Sewanyana, who is the Executive Director for the Foundation for Human Rights Initiative. Right next to him, we have Miss Ruth Sechindi, who is with the Uganda Human Rights Commission. She's a Director of Monitoring and Inspections. And to my extreme left, the Acting Spokesperson for the Independent Electoral Commission, Mr. Paul Bukenya. That's where we leave it for this particular edition. We'll definitely be back. Be sure to hear from many stakeholders in this particular poll. This is the My Rights, My Power campaign. It is not just ending at the election. It will be continuing. It is definitely a going concern. We do love to hear from all the different stakeholders in this particular election. And of course, its aftermath. I'm Arnold Sagawa. That's where we'll leave it for this particular one. I will be back in due course with my esteemed panelists. For me and the entire team, have a good afternoon.